My father-in-law thought I was poor until he saw my bank account. I, 24 years old, got married last year when my wife and I were 23 years old. I'm a college dropout while my wife is still in college, almost finishing up her degree. My wife and I dated for 2 years, until we decided that it was time to introduce ourselves to our parents. A year after I met her parents, I ended up proposing to her, and the rest was history. I had a lot of backlash with my decision to marry my wife, but I love her with all my heart, and that was all that mattered. People assume that since I'm young, I won't be able to provide for my wife, although in some cases that may be true. It's not in my situation. I've been doing e-commerce ever since I was 16, and I've built multiple businesses online that made me live a comfortable life. I have a side job at my friend's food truck where I work to kill time. I guess my father-in-law had a different reaction when he found out that I worked at a food truck and I was doing side hustles online. I don't blame him, to be honest. In his eyes, I looked like a bum, and it was pretty understandable. Recently, my wife told me that her parents cooked food and invited us over for dinner. I haven't seen them in a while, and I figured I would give them a gift. After all, they're my in-laws, and I wanted them to love me. I bought her father an expensive liquor bottle that my uncle picked out, since her father liked to drink from time to time. I bought her mother a Michael Kors bag that my wife told me she has always wanted. The night came, and my wife and I both arrived at their house with the gifts. They asked us to come inside, and my wife and I walked into the living room. I gave my mother-in-law her bag, and it's fair to say that she was very happy. She looked surprised, and she gave both my wife and me a big hug. But then, she looked at my wife and gave her a silent expression that probably made her wonder how we were able to afford to buy her the bag. Afterwards, I ended up looking at my father-in-law who was smiling, and I ended up giving him the liquor bottle. His eyes widened, and he asked me if he had any idea how much the bottle I bought him was. I smiled, and made a joke saying it was too much, but later asked what they had cooked to change the subject. My father-in-law, still shocked, looked at my mother-in-law with his mouth wide open. My wife started laughing at their expressions, and we ended up sitting at the dining table where we started having conversations about different topics. The topic of finances came up, and my father-in-law told me that I shouldn't have bought him something so expensive since it was out of my budget. I told him that it was fine, and that I didn't mind giving them high-quality things because they were my family now. Still, you still work at a food truck, and doing your silly side hustles, he replied. Speaking of side hustles, what do you do on the side again? I told him that I create businesses and help other people market their product on social media. My father-in-law laughed and told me that the description I gave him sounded like I was making $500,000 per year. I told him that it was close to that number as I started laughing until both my mother and father-in-law started laughing at the same time. I guess they thought that I was joking, so I just laughed with them. He then proceeded to tell me that I can't be working at a food truck forever. I told him that I was just working at the food truck to kill time, and that I didn't need that job. My father-in-law looked confused, began telling me that I should go back to school, get a good office job, and retire by the time I was in my 60s. He told me that path is the right path for financial freedom. You can now check if there's a part 2 by pressing share and more. My father-in-law thought I was poor until he saw my bank account part 2. He told me that path is the right path for financial freedom, but I disagreed with his opinion. Did I disagree in front of him? No. That is my father-in-law, and they are Asians. Older folks tend to feel disrespected when younger people have a different opinion or perspective. He then continued and told my wife to help me apply to college, in which my wife told him that I didn't need to. My father-in-law started to get agitated and started asking why my wife would say I didn't need to when I have no degree and work at a food truck. Because he already makes a lot of money, my wife replied. My father-in-law looked at my wife like she was crazy and started asking her if what I was making at the food truck was a lot of money to her. I started to calm down the situation before my father-in-law cut in and told me to be quiet because they were trying to help me. My wife then started arguing back, telling her father that I was not making a lot working at the food truck, but instead, my side hustles. My father-in-law laughed, expecting my wife to tell him that she was joking, but her face was blank and serious. My father-in-law then told her that a person can't just claim something without showing proof. My wife looked at me and demanded that I showed my daily earnings for today, in which I hesitated on doing. But I'm scared of my wife, so I ended up grabbing my phone from my pocket and accessing my earnings. My wife grabbed the phone and showed her my daily earnings for today, which was sitting at $6,000 in sales. My wife then pressed on the monthly earnings, and both my mother and father-in-law saw my earnings for the month sitting at $224,000. My father-in-law was speechless and began telling my wife that he won't believe it until it's in my bank account. He argued that a number on another app could be fake and we might be playing him. So my wife looked back at me and asked me to pull up my bank account. I told her that it's kind of personal, in which my wife told me that I shouldn't be shy if my bank account has a lot of money. So I ended up opening my Chase account, and both my father and mother-in-law ended up seeing my checking and savings account. I'm not going to reveal how much they saw, but it's fair to say that they have not made any comment about going to college or my financials since. Ever since then, they've been sending my wife Amazon links for couches, and sometimes telling my wife that they wanted a new car. I don't mind, to be honest, but I would be lying if I didn't feel some sort of way about them asking for things. I was actually thinking of buying them a new car, but my wife stopped me and told me that it was a stupid decision. She told me that they look down on me, so why should I be rewarding them? My wife told me to make them earn my trust and love instead of my money.